He's here a bit early, but that's okay. I like talking to him. We are joined with Patrick Henningsen. Patrick Henningsen, he is analyst, journalist, host of SundayWire.com, creator of 21st Century Wire, and critic of mainstream media's propaganda. Patrick, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing okay this morning?
I'm good, Jamal. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great.
I was given an intro of the quote-unquote big speech that Donald Trump gave. Apparently, Putin hurt his feelings because Putin didn't accept his nonsense proposal. And to be very clear, and I'm going to get your take on it just as we step into it, Russia made the point of saying, look, and by the way, against many people who were, let's say, more of a hardliners, Putin was willing to have a ceasefire, but Putin's terms were pretty straightforward. Stop giving them weapons, stop giving them training, no NATO expansion, and we will have a ceasefire where we can effectively talk. Trump didn't want to do that. In fact, he told them flat out, no, we're not doing that, meaning Europe is going to continue to send weapons. He wants an unconditional ceasefire where Europe continues to send weapons, the U.S. continues to send weapons. And this is effectively just mince three. A man as dishonest as Trump, I don't know why anybody would trust him. And Putin, fortunately, doesn't. Give me your take on this. I find this to be a betrayal. And I don't think it would be just me. I think many of my audience who there are some misbegotten souls that supported Trump that would probably also see this as somewhat of a betrayal. Give me your thoughts, though.
I would have looked at it as a betrayal maybe a few months ago, Jamar, but now I'm past that. And because if it was a betrayal, it would mean that Donald Trump's previous position would have been sincere. And I'm really now looking back doubting whether that was the case, whether he actually understood anything, about this conflict, about what each side of the conflict is trying to achieve, what Russia's position is, how that relates to U.S. national security, to European stability. I don't think Donald Trump cares or has factored any of these things in. He's clearly taking orders from neocons, war hawks, and people like Lindsey Graham. He's shown himself to be a very weak leader, Donald Trump. He's been banging on for, how long now? 4 years about Biden's weakness. If you turn on Fox every 5 minutes, Biden's weakness. Oh, this is a mess because of Biden's weakness. And what about Trump's weakness? Trump can't even stand up to the likes of Lindsey Graham. I mean, that's pretty weak, if you ask me. You can't call yourself an alpha male if you can't repel somebody like Lindsey Graham, and I will leave it there. But you know what I'm talking about. So it's like, where is he getting these policy directives from? And I think what it seems to me, Jamal, is that what Russia's position has been pretty much ironclad, hasn't changed at all in 3 years. They want to demilitarize Ukraine. They don't want Ukraine in NATO. They want to denazify Ukraine. They want to remove the threat to Russia, basically. And that threat has increased over 3 years because Ukraine, using Western weapons, has been striking deep inside Russian territory. So that even makes this situation more critical from a Russian perspective. You have to take that into account when you're negotiating, or if you're interested in negotiation. U.S. is not negotiating. They're basically saying, accept our unconditional terms, or we're going to crush you, or we're going to keep giving weapons, and we're going to keep this war going. So it's the same with Iran. It's the same with Ukraine. It's the same with Hamas. Either it's our way or there's no way, basically. That's not negotiations. So if you don't submit to the will of the U.S., we're going to hit you with not just more proxy war, but sanctions and also punitive tariffs to people trading with you. He's talking about secondary sanctions. Okay, that's a disaster because half of those are going to be levied against U.S. allies. And, you don't try to strong-arm Russia's two biggest trading partners, China and India. That's not going to end well. You're forcing them to make decisions and to think about the future and say, do I want to keep this coercive relationship with the United States going? Why? To have access to U.S. markets, or am I going to invest in my future, which is Asia? The growth, the money, the GDP growth markets, they're in Asia. Direct foreign investment, it's going to Asia. It's not going to the United States. So the Asian economy is in a prime position to grow and prosper. The U.S. economy is going the opposite direction. So is the European economy. And so it's kind of interesting, Jamal, because what the U.S.'s strategy, and I know why Trump is doing this, okay? Some of these geniuses he's got around him said, look at the Russian economy, it's faltering. They're projecting a 2.5% GDP this 2025. That's down from 4.5 or 4.3 or whatever it was in 2024. So Russia's going to be cutting interest rates to try to ease the economy a little bit. They're in trouble. Keep the pressure on. We can bleed Russia dry economically. That's exactly what they were saying before February 2022, and it didn't work. But they're sticking to this because they believe this is what brought them victory for the Cold War at the end of the 1980s, that they broke the back of the Soviet Union by bleeding them through an arms race. I tell you that this is how people in Washington think. They have an old template from the past. They think they can repurpose that for the present day, and that's totally valid. And they just proceed forward on that basis. So the reality is Russia is bleeding the European economy dry through keeping them engaged in this proxy war. Countries like Finland are going broke right now as we speak because of this proxy war, because of the sanctions. Okay, the United States is on the verge of bankruptcy as well. So the opposite is happening. They're going to, if the objective, why I'm saying this, Jamal, if this was really sincere and the objective was to try to, stop people from trading with Russia and to try to somehow, weaken the Russian economy, the U.S. is going to get the opposite because it's going to increase and accelerate de-dollarization. More than sanctions, using punitive tariffs. Tariffs are not meant to be used this way. So Trump has found a new use for tariffs, which is to fashion them into a form of sanctions. And so it's going to increase de-dollarization. It's going to empower BRICS, and it's going to increase trade between Asian countries and less trade with the U.S. So if the object is to bring money and traffic and commerce and trade to the U.S., they're going to get the opposite of what that objective is by this policy. You can't use coercive measures against your allies. I mean, you can, and it might work with some, but ultimately, if there are other markets available, you're basically inviting them to de-dollarize. And I see this as a part of this trend.
Which is why I'm all for it. If I'm being bluntly honest with you, I am sick of, look, we are a force for evil in the world, not a force for good, not a force for positivity. And whether it's going after Brazil, whether it's going after Europe, whether it's going after add what any random other country into it, you are exactly right. Competence is not their strong suit. And what they think is, well, we need to be strong in this moment. And strong in this moment means taking some kind of proactive action, missing the fact that you are effectively making the argument that people have made for the entire purpose of de-dollarization and for the very existence of BRICS. Like, meaning if you had a fair, honest system, BRICS wouldn't exist. BRICS exists purely because you do not have a fair and honest system. And so everything that Donald Trump is doing up to this point is effectively saying, hey, A, you were right for starting it, and B, you were right for pushing through de-dollarization. So agreed. One last point. I think you are giving them far too much credit in regards to them thinking this through. I think the U.S. is in a position where it's a hegemon that is trying to maintain this mantle of being a hegemon. And so they're trying to continuously look strong. Like, for example, Donald Trump could have just walked. He didn't have to keep this war going. He could have just walked. But he didn't want to be blamed for losing the war. He doesn't want to look, quote unquote, weak. And so for his thing is, okay, well, Putin is not going to make a deal with me. No, he's not going to make a deal, you stupid deal. And so we need to find ways to coerce him into doing so. The first was spiderweb attack, the one that took place where they blew up a train with civilians on it, basically just terrorism, hitting the nuclear triad of Russia. And I've had people on this channel say, well, why would he do that? He would do that for the exact same reason that he's doing this. In fact, let me get your take on something else. One of the things that Financial Times came out with is that Trump asked Zelensky, hey, could you hit Moscow? And Zelensky was like, if you give me the weapons, I could. And he said, hey, also hit St. Petersburg. We need to effectively get Putin to come to the table. So when I made the point earlier of saying it is obvious that Trump is running a shadow war below the war that Trump is running, and that he was trying to compel the Russians to come into the negotiating table, again, ham-fisted, backfired. Well, this is the exact same thing. Let's give you weapons so you can try to hit Moscow, St. Petersburg. That'll bring Putin to the negotiating table. It's just outrageous. Give me a take on this.
What's more outrageous is that Ukraine is willing to play that role, or the leadership in Kiev. Is that corrupt? And is that depraved? That imagine if Russia approached Cuba with the same proposition. Cuba would probably tell them to take a hike.
Yes.
You know, we're not interested in sacrificing all of our fighting aged male population at the altar of the Holy Church of NATO. Sorry, we're just not interested. I mean, who would be stupid enough to go through with that? Who would be corrupt enough? Well, you found them. They're in Kiev. Yeah, Zelensky. I mean, this is so. It's funny when Trump was approached on this issue at one of his recent pressers or whatever it was in the White House. He said, "Yeah, of course we're gonna send a lot of weapons to Ukraine because they need to defend themselves." But this is the thing: Ukraine can't defend itself against Russia. The weapons are not defensive weapons. Mostly that the U.S. will be sending them. They'll be sending them offensive weapons. Right. And they already hit a target, I think, just yesterday inside Russia. Plus, the U.S. and the Germans are talking about sending long-range missiles and having missile launchers and so forth Germany's going to get a 2,000, I think, kilometer range launcher installed in Germany. Of course, that's not a good look, but also in Ukraine. So it's not defensive. But the gambit is that, and Trump believes, and these other people, the Europeans believe, is just because Russia hasn't hit back in a certain way against Europe, even though they're blatantly driving this war, supplying the weapons to hit targets inside Russia, they believe that they can provoke Russia far enough and hard enough in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, or wherever, Operation Spider's Web, that they can force Russia to the negotiation table. I mean, this is just flawed. It's flawed logic, and it's just ridiculous. But they're building their policy around these false assumptions, and I wonder if it's because they really believe that this will work, or they believe this is the right thing politically to say and do because of the corner that they've painted themselves into over 3 years. And I really think we're in a kind of a strange zone of incompetence and hubris, something of a Faustian tale, where the West is in a situation where they really done a deal with the devil on this, and they have no way out other than to publicly humiliate themselves and resign, which we know that's not going to happen. I mean, they'd rather walk over hot coals for a mile than do that. Any politician in the West, I mean, that's career suicide. So that's not going to happen. So it's a downward spiral. It's a death spiral diplomatically, and there is no negotiations, Jamal, with Trump. Deals are not agreements. You see, a deal is a one-way thing he's imposing. Believes with leverage. He thinks it's a big property market. He thinks it's Lower Manhattan. No, agreements are between countries and governments, and they involve other countries to help guarantee and glue that agreement together. This is how treaties and things like this are formed historically. Trump thinks he can just throw away world history. No, this is the way I like to do business, and if you don't like it, you can take a hike, kind of thing. It's just ridiculous. It's amazing more Democrats haven't copped on or pushing back on this correctly but they hate Russia so much they really probably don't care. I mean, the U.S. is at such a low ebb right now. It's really shocking.
Yeah, I think they're desperate. And what I mean by that is, you have a weak man that has no convictions but in himself. He has no cards, and to take a term from himself. He's massively distrusted. So you have no credibility as a person, let alone as a leader. And what they know in real terms is that an organization that spent 50 years preparing for a war with the Soviet Union And like the remnant of the Soviet Union, they're getting crushed by it. So it's like, okay, so what does it mean for NATO? What does it mean for the US to effectively lose a war on this big scale like this? I don't think they can countenance that loss. I think everything that you're seeing are these kind of reflexive moves, not strategic, just tactics, reflexive, just pivoting from point A to point B to avoid losing on point A. At least that's my take on it. I don't think they have an overarching strategy. I mean, you can say the Rand Corporation and the plans in order to overextend Russia.
Yeah,
but that's basically it. There is no beyond that. At least for my take on it. I mean, how do you see it? I mean, do you see there something more here than that?
In the words of Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now, or no, it wasn't Colonel Kurtz, it was Martin Sheen playing the role. When Kurtz asked him, "What do you think about my methods?" And Martin Sheen looks at Colonel Kurtz, who's played by Marlon Brando, and says, "I see no methods." Sorry. So you're right. It's all tactics. It's all tactics. There's no strategy. There is strategy. I'm sure that Rand Corporation overextending Russia is probably a bedrock of the strategy. The other strategy is what I would call facsimiles of the past, templates of the past. So Cold War glory rewarmed in the microwave. We will bleed them dry economically. Ukraine will be there. Afghanistan. You can see all these echoes of tropes throughout U.S. history. This is a type of a currency, if you will, in think tank land, in Washington and foreign policy land. I think on the lower IQ ebb of that world, the higher IQ ebb, of course, whether they've fled already, they must have, because I can't see anybody left in D.C. Save but maybe a few. But so the bottom line is here's the $1 million question, or the $100 billion question, or whatever. For Ukraine, see, they're gonna hit the wall at some point, and it might be sooner than later. Zelensky just extended his presidential powers this week, so again extended his president for life status for 3 months. I suppose that'll be rolled over again in 3 months. So no elections, state of emergency. So the Ukraine, the regime in Ukraine can carry this on indefinitely. That's for sure. Up until the point where you're getting all these weapons, but you don't have any men to fight. Okay,
right.
So they need men, not weapons. The other thing is, for Ukraine, the war cannot last forever. Hence, there's limits, human resources, and the political unrest in that country. Do people realize that there are resistance factions in Ukraine now against Zelensky? Do people understand that? Because that's the day-to-day reality. And a lot of it was spawned out of the forced conscription, okay? Mm-hmm. There is a underground resistance network in Ukraine that oppose the Zelensky government. And believe it or not, this might blow your mind, Jamal, some of them are far right. So you have the pro-Russian resistance allying with the far right to get rid of Zelensky and this regime because they both want the war to end. I'm not saying that's the totality of the scene there, but there are cells and factions. They do have a problem with this in Kiev, with this, and especially I would say very much so in places like Odessa, which is nominally Russian demographically. But here's the deal for the West. The West would love this to go on forever, to build a defense economy in the West, to rearm Europe, okay? But the reality is they're not going to be able to get it. They're talking like they can keep this proxy war going forever. And they believe, Jamal, trust me, they believe in London and in Paris and in Washington and Berlin that they just need more time to weaken Russia economically, and they'll be able to overwhelm them with drone swarms, okay? This is in the British Defense Review. Operation Killweb, the British call it. Ukraine launched Operation Spider's Web. It's all part of the same doctrine, okay? They believe they just need more time to combine drone swarms with new missiles and other technology, and that they'll be able to defeat Russia. So, but the thing is, the West probably aren't going to be able to get that indefinite proxy war. So, but they need it at the minimum to last for 5 more years till 2030. That's how long it will take for all the new kind of procurement, reconfiguring the European economy, extending deficits in order to finance the, quote, rearming of Europe. And then Trump already announced he's sending weapons to Ukraine, and that's going to go through NATO. So NATO's going to, NATO will pay for the weapons, pay the U.S. Yeah, supposedly, exactly. They'll supposedly pay the U.S. So Trump's really excited about having this transaction portal because he loves, of course, payment gateways as a businessman. And then somehow this is going to sort of make the arrangement, if you will, with Europe and the U.S. more clean and more transactional. But they need 5 years to make this all to kick in, to build, start getting momentum on a manufacturing base in Europe and all this. So they might not make it to 2030 on this conflict, but they do. That's how cynical this ploy is. This, to me, an arming of the Arctic, that's the next front, which we're covering a lot at 21st Century Wire, which is very much related to the Nord Stream pipelines. But this is all an economic grift. These are people, and it's from the defense industry to government, right down to academia. There's grants, there's money, there's funding, there's all sorts of development, investment from the state, all over Europe, United States, UK, and Europe. And so they want to basically militarize Europe, militarize the Arctic, militarize that new front line along Russia's western border, and that's it. That's the plan. That's the plan. And it's very cynical. It's very cynical. And they believe, like all these Cold Warriors, that we won the Cold War because we beat the Soviet Union in an arms race, and let's do it again. That's how simple and baseline their thinking is, okay? And that's exactly, if I told you all these talking points, Jamal, and I repeated them at a lecture in Washington, D.C., I'd have everybody showing up, patting me on the back, saying, wow, you're really smart, Patrick. You're really good. Let's bleed them dry. Yeah, just like the Cold War. Yeah. And it's like, I can rev them up. I can get the crowd going. No problem.
That's just telling them what they want to hear.
Yeah.
And I wonder if 3 a.m. between them and their God, they actually believe that stuff. Meaning, if I need to come up with a coherent, that's the saying, don't mistake the coherent for true. Just because it's coherent doesn't mean it's true. I would wonder whether or not at 3 a.m. between them and their God, if they really believe it. I don't doubt that there are some people out there. There was some goofball who was on Twitter who was like, hey, we need to not wait 50 days. Donald Trump either needs to get the U.S. involved, even if it means having a third world war. And it's like, are you out of your effing mind? You're talking about having a third world war, nuclear war over Ukraine. It's like, okay, suit up. If you feel that strongly about it, put on a uniform. Ukraine has lost enough men. For God's sake, they're chasing men through the streets to try to drag him and throw him into the, press gang him. You could easily join up, but he's not going to easily join up. He's just going to say stupid shit on Twitter like that. So I don't doubt that there are some lunatics who believe that stuff. But part of me has to think that there is no way, meaning if I need to come up with an argument for some behavior that is atrocious, okay, I may be able to do that, but I can never be honest with you about the argument. I can't say, well, look, we need to knock over Russia because this is about global hegemony. We want to maintain control of the globe. And we being the United States working with our vassals in Europe. Okay, well, I can't say that. That sounds bad. That sounds impolite, especially for a country that supposedly is a quote unquote democracy. And democracies, quote unquote, don't supposed to do stuff like that. But if I need to say, all right, I'm going to put the CIA into Ukraine. I'm going to overthrow the government of Ukraine. I'm going to blow off the Minsk agreements. I'm going to do all that stuff, but I'm not going to tell people that I'm doing all that stuff. And then I'm going to say, well, the Russians just attacked because they're evil, horrible people. And I'm going to use Cold War rhetoric in order to coat myself into this kind of Cold War thing as if we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. Okay, well, I can do that. That's different because the majority of the population is not bright enough to know the difference. Does it make sense? Meaning, do you think they know that? Or do you think
we know that. We know the truth. I think anybody who's objective and has a critical thinking skills, they can see through this. But you'd be surprised, Jamal, how people can convince themselves that their own BS is plausible if the money is right. and believe that's a big motivator. Career, money, power, and you can convince yourself, because if you're doing U.S. policy and you've got a number of tracks available in front of you to proceed forward, obviously that grand strategy, I don't even think Trump can articulate what U.S. grand strategy is. So
I don't think he
that's
could
it.
either.
So it's really short term if you think about it. So just mobilizing, militarizing the economy, going into debt with a permanent state of war, having your whole national economy somehow dependent on wars that are going on and so forth. If it came to the crunch, obviously we're on the edge of a major abyss financially, monetarily, the U.S. dollar as well. They're looking, and what Trump is doing is accelerating the negative sides of that situation by leaps and bounds. And but of course, throughout history, and certainly U.S. governments have done this to varying degrees in history, where they've decided to join or wage a war. Other empires have done it as well, rather than deal with the fundamentals, the underlying fundamentals that are driving, economic decline and potential catastrophe. It's much easier, at least from a public perception point of view, dealing with the plebs to drag the country into a war. But the public's a lot more intelligent now, and I even think people of average intelligence and engagement in politics can see through a lot of this. In terms, if they were then told, no, we must fight the Russians, a lot of sensible people who don't even know about geopolitics will say, why? Yeah. What has Russia done to us? Oh, Ukraine. If you talk to people in Sweden and Finland who are on the NATO gravy train, there's quite a few of them now, they'll say, why did you join NATO? Because you just painted a target on yourself, and now you have to basically go against one of the world's nuclear superpowers. They'll say, well, because of Ukraine. And there's no answer. And then if I retort back to them, I say, well, why did the conflict break out in February 25th, 2022 in Ukraine? What happened there? What preceded that? They don't want to have that discussion. So everybody's on this kind of short attention span theater with these limited timelines, bolstered by propaganda. They believe their own propaganda, and many people are incentivized to promulgate it because of the financial incentives. And that's we're kind of stuck there. And this is a big problem, So I think that's, cold. They still believe that there's this ultimate victory, that Russia's bleeding on the battlefield. The Russians are on the edge of, defeat. If we just push them a little harder, they'll keep going. They're going to keep going till the bitter end, and that bitter end will be when Ukraine is absolutely wrecked, and they don't have anybody to field. They're talking about conscripting women now in Ukraine.
Yes, they are.
Sweden just announced they're going to raise the conscription age to 70 years old. 70.
That's amazing.
So geriatrics, they want to get retired officers with experience and into the field, but to do what? To defend the border? Do you really think Russia's going to invade Sweden? How can they be so stupid? They don't need to. You don't need to do that. In World War II, you did, okay? Maybe to subdue an enemy or to neutralize an enemy on your border. Now Russia will just send arresting missiles and destroy the Saab factory, makes all the anti-tank munitions, and they'll just wipe out Sweden's industrial base in like 48 hours, and then say to Stockholm, do you guys want to negotiate? Do you still want to fight? And they'll be like, oh, Article 5. Yeah, you think, so is Europe really willing to get into a nuclear tussle with Russia? And I think they're hoping they can kick the can down the road with this proxy war and get to the point where they will have that nuclear standoff between France, Britain, and Russia, for instance. And then they can drag the United States in, and this is the game plan. So how many times has the U.S. been, imagine that, Jamal, the U.S. being dragged into a war started by Europeans involving, Russia and Germany. That has never happened before in history, has it? Only twice.
Yeah, I don't think we're being dragged into it.
Well, yeah, proverbially dragged, but if the U.S. truly wants to decouple from Europe, as the noises Vance and Trump are making, And I don't think they're very sincere, at least from J.D. Vance's point of view. I don't think he fully understands the ramifications of that. Look, it's fine. Yeah, if I was the U.S. president, I would say, yeah, let's get out of NATO. But before we get out of NATO, we want NATO to dissolve, and then we'll get out of NATO. So, because NATO is the Trojan horse for more war, basically. And the United States will be automatically, maybe that's the plan, to arm up Europe and then fake this exit by the U.S. and then with the full intention that the U.S. is going to come back in as they did in previous world wars.
I don't think that the U.S. really wants. I mean, NATO is a tool of a power projection tool for the United States into Europe. The U.S. doesn't. Like, I got to be honest with you. When Donald Trump kept saying he wants, everybody was saying Trump wants to pull out of NATO. Trump wants to pull out of NATO, and I was like, why? This is what the U.S. uses to project power through Europe. It is literally what we use. If there was no NATO, how would the U.S. justify projecting power?
Well, that would be it. It would be it. Would be maybe no more projecting power in Europe and maybe having a normal, bilateral, multilateral relationship with Europe rather than a dominance relationship. But the other thing, the lie is that, well, NATO's costing us. NATO doesn't cost the U.S. anything. NATO makes money for the U.S. in terms of weapon sales. So the U.S. already spends X amount, percentage of its GDP on defense anyway. There is the NATO budget for operating is minuscule. The economies they're talking about are each country's individual defense budget, okay, which he wants them to raise to 5%, which is going to bankrupt quite a few European countries or put them into deficit spending where they're going to, it will hit the euro, it will hit their economy, it will create stagflation, all sorts of other things. But so it's a whole lie. It's a con. You're right, Jamal. NATO is about it's about political control, it's about economic control, and it's about grand strategy for the British and the Americans mainly. Okay, so and that's what So for Europe for NATO to dissolve could be potentially a good thing because NATO is redundant. It doesn't have a purpose anymore. It does now. They've created a purpose for it, but it's going to be ultimately destructive because this is a fake, contrived paradigm of an East-West conflict. Before, maybe it was more real. I mean, you had the ideological component with communism, and so that was real. And the Soviet Union was a bona fide global superpower, and so I could see, yes, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, fine. It is designed to keep America in. It's going to serve its purpose through the Cold War. But once the Cold War is finished and the end of history is declared, as it was in the early 90s, then that should have been it for NATO. Instead of NATO disbanding or receding, it accelerated and expanded. You see, and that's the source of the problem here. But NATO without the U.S. is dangerous because a rogue actor within NATO, like Britain, for instance, or like France, could cause or trigger a bigger conflict that's going to require the United States to be involved at that point if they're allies with those European countries, which they are. So that's the irony. NATO could only work in the U.S. if they stopped expanding and the U.S. had sane, responsible, let's say, forward-thinking and leadership that was cautious and circumspect. That would work for NATO. I could still accept it, but with the last couple of administrations, you can see what a disaster NATO is for everybody within its blast radius. It's a disaster.
Empires they don't get that way. Meaning, the moment that an empire feels like it's under pressure, it's acting just the way the U.S. is acting now. It feels its power degrading. It feels its position in the world declining. It has engaged itself in multiple conflicts around the world. One huge one in Ukraine, another one in Israel, is trying to get into one in China. All of these have vestiges of what it considers to be necessary in order to maintain hegemony. And it is not sane and rational in the way that it's acting. I'm curious on something about Europe, though. You got to explain this to me. Europe has to know that it's being screwed over, or does it know it's being screwed over? If you think of the weapons, the United States, the weapons that we sell are well overpriced. And there's always this question about return on investment, meaning whether or not the weapon systems that you either create or buy are worth what you're paying for it. Okay, so Europe has just told, potentially, Donald Trump, after spending, 3 years of doing this, buying weapon systems in order to give to Ukraine. And that's on top of the money that they've just been given to Ukraine in and of itself. So they've been spending money on weapons, meaning money fleeing Europe into America in order to give to Ukraine. On top of that, the amount of gas that it stopped purchasing from Russia, and for that matter, even the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline. Okay, well, all of those things were damaging to Europe because now the amount of money that they're paying for energy went through the roof. So instead of buying energy from Russia that is reliable, certain price, you're getting it from Saudi Arabia, you're getting it from India with the markup,
Qatar,
and Qatar, and from the U.S., where the U.S. was charging them 5 times more. And there's this great scene where Macron tells Joe Biden, he said, "Hey, aren't we in it together, Joe?" And Joe Biden was like, "No, no, we're not. Pay us." Meaning all of this is money that is just fleeing Europe. This doesn't even talk about the companies that can't afford to pay for that energy that have effectively had to close up or leave. I mean, for God's sake, Germany has been getting killed on this front. How do they not see that? That is mind-blowing to me that they don't see that this is a boondoggle by America. And instead, they're like, we need daddy to stay with us.
Well, Germany's able to absorb a certain amount of that shock just from the sheer weight and mass of their economy. It's significant. But the smaller countries are really being hurt, like Finland, for instance, I mentioned earlier. The recent announcements and numbers coming out is a disaster. So it's not been good for them. And other European countries are struggling, or we're struggling already, and this is only adds insult to injury. So, and this the result of this. I mean, the European energy market, which, if you think about Enron in the United States and that sort of energy revolution that came in, just creating a middleman in terms of an energy market where you had to buy and book power in advance. They created a whole financialized layer in energy. And so state-owned, and I'm saying state, like states within the U.S., state-owned, or, the idea of a national grid and so forth, all of those things basically were rapaciously privatized and financialized as a result of Enron. Enron died, but the system that Enron pioneered didn't. And they implemented that in the UK and in Europe as well. So that was the beginning of this sort of, quadrupling of, energy bills, household and business energy bills. And now the Nord Stream pipeline, Russian sanctions, it's taken that to a new level. And I think the Nord Stream pipeline single-handedly bailed out the U.S. Fracking industry, the LNG industry. And of course, if I say that to people in that industry, they get very angry at me. I've had very, very stern, harsh debates with them about, no, how can you say that? It hasn't helped us at all. Oh, really? Let's look at the numbers. Really? And I could pull the stats and the numbers. So it's a clear case to be made. There was a premeditated benefit for U.S. firms and U.S. markets for destroying the Nord Stream pipeline. And that's exactly what happened. So there's motive there for that. But the bigger picture there is what it's done to Europe economically and continues to do to Europe economically, and they want to, increase. They want to increase AI as a big component of the new economy. Well, that's going to require energy. It's going to require energy, and it's going to require cheap energy. So Europe can't be a leader in AI if it doesn't have cheap energy, and so you can continue to run massive deficits, but that's just going to grade away, destroy, and erode the European economy over time, and turn Europe into an economic backwater globally. And that's exactly where it's heading. Norway was also a big beneficiary of the Nord Stream. Yes. Norway is the biggest independent energy producer in Europe. And so they have benefited massively. It's put them in a pole position. And this is why they have such a central role in NATO now. And if you look at the geopolitical center of gravity, as far as Europe is concerned, it's shifting north. It's shifting towards the Arctic. So everybody's talking about the Arctic now. The Arctic this, the Arctic. We need to stop Russia in the Arctic. The Chinese and the Russians are coming through the Northwest Passage, and we need to stop them. And They want to steal all the rare earths from under the Arctic ice and this and that. And it's all because Putin and the Russians are just naturally inherently aggressive. It has nothing to do with the expansion of NATO. This is the argument I get from the Western side. And they're saying, oh, because Ukraine, we need to, militarize the Arctic. No, it's because there's energy concerns in the north as well. Europe still needs to capture some of those, and they need to deny access to some of those resources, deny China, deny Russia. So this is about global competition still. But again, they can't afford to maintain this complete another militarized zone, another one. Where's the money going to come from this? Are they mining gold in Europe now that we don't know about? Are there massive gold deposits all over Europe, in Luxembourg and Denmark and Netherlands and Germany? Like, where is the money? Have they discovered oil in Germany? I'm just wondering, like, where the cash is coming from on this. It's coming from debt. That's the plan. Let's go into debt. Let's do what the U.S. did. Let's run massive deficit spending budgets year in, year out, ramp up our defense, and we're going to end up having a war, Jamal. It will end up with war. That's where things are going to head, because the only solution to these people is to arm up. And of course, Russia has to arm up as well. Nobody's talking about diplomacy. I attended an event last week on this very topic, and there wasn't a word about the cheap option, of course, is to have some kind of a diplomatic political agreement and settlement, and so people don't have to blow half their public expenditures on weapons. But nobody wanted to talk about that because everybody in academia, they've got funding for this. The defense industry is bringing jobs for that. This is how they're talking. These are people on the left, Jamal. They've militarized the left.
They're not on the left.
They're not on the left. The old left, but they're still pushing climate change, though. They're saying, climate change is melting the ice in the Arctic, and that's emboldening the Russians. So they tie the climate change issue to the Russian issue, and that's why the Arctic is like the perfect equation for these people to push for this militarization of the Arctic and increase war footing against Russia. And you can only keep doing this so long before it does end up becoming a war. And then what? And then what? What are you going to do then? What's Europe going to do then? Lick its wounds and, evacuate?
You would think that after 2 world wars that Europe will stop dragging the world into world wars, but they don't. They keep doing it. The Arctic is a really good example. Yeah, the Arctic is a really good example. I'm glad you brought that up. Because Russia, from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, has a dominant presence in that part of the world, in that region of the world. The U.S. wanted to effectively steal Greenland, which is just astonishingly stupid, but okay. They wanted to steal Greenland for that precise reason. Yep. I agree with you. I do think this is angling for a war. Money is not real in a traditional sense of the word, so they can go into deficits and do kind of like the United States did, where we created $36 trillion out of thin air. And we're going to put another, 10 trillion on top of that 36 trillion. It was something that Putin said, and I didn't really get it until Putin actually made the point. He was like, the U.S. created $10 trillion out of thin air to go to war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And if you think about that, that is money that you don't have to do anything for. You don't have to do anything other than just print it, which means that the way that money is equated to physical matter, reality, and physical matter goods and those type of things, you can effectively build a $10 trillion military out of thin air and use that $10 trillion military for anything that you want to use it for, conquest or otherwise, in a way where other countries have to actually care about their budgets and can't just produce $10 trillion out of thin air.
They have to actually produce and trade to make that money, real money. I'll give you an example. China had poured in $12 billion into Libya before NATO destroyed Libya. And that was one of the reasons why NATO went after Libya and it created instability and partitioned Sudan, was to evict China. If you look at the early AFRICOM documents, many of which they've wiped from the internet, it was to evict Chinese influence from Africa. But that was real cash. China had to earn that. and invest it. That was real money. What the U.S. are throwing around is not real money, and this is the unfair advantage. The entire U.S. empire, America's great, quote, great, because of the ability to create money out of thin air, running a world reserve currency, this system. So Elon Musk is, we need to make America great again, but we need to control deficit spending. I have to tell you, Elon, sorry to break it to you, but American greatness is predicated on deficit spending. Yes. So you can't pretend to be, a champion of balanced budgets or against deficit spending, but you still want America to be great. America can't be great in the sense of globally dominant unless it's able to have a world reserve currency. And deficit spending, the value of the dollar, or the demand for the dollar is propped up by virtue of the fact that it is the world reserve currency. So all of these things, the sanctions, tariff wars, this is eventually driving people out of the dollar, and then that will damage the ability of the dollar to sustain itself as a global reserve currency, and then it's going to fail domestically. And I think they know this day is coming, and they're scrambling to try to replace the dollar with a digital dollar or integrate crypto and other things into some kind of a new financial platform. With Trump with his meme coins and his trash coins, stable coins, and they're all making money out of this. By the way,
yes, they are,
and they're making money off their base who don't have any money. And so when these rug pulls happen on Trump coins or Melania coins, Trump's robbing his own working class base, the very people that voted for him. That's who's getting actually taken to the cleaners, which is ironic because these people still support Trump because it's turned into a bit of a cult. But the cult of MAGA is fracturing, and the Epstein debacle this past week is going to accelerate that as well. But the point is can't we have a U.S. leader or a leadership to intelligently and responsibly articulate to the public the true condition of the economy and the financial system, and then put forward an honest plan of how we're going to, survive this or mitigate that or transition to something else and get some buy-in or consensus or not? That's not happening. Instead, you got these arbitrary kind of, esoteric trade wars that Trump is waging. That nobody knows what the hell is going on. They say, "Oh, don't trust him. He's got this Scott Bessett's a genius. Don't worry." They wouldn't play Russian roulette, no pun intended, with the U.S. economy. They'd never do that. These are the best people in Wall Street. I don't know. I beg to differ. I'm not impressed at all, and I don't see the economic performance. But if you listen to Breitbart and Fox, they'll say the U.S. economy is its strongest ever in history. Well, Biden said it was the strongest economy in history as well. So these typical politicians, they will never tell the truth about the economy ever, no. Or inflation or anything related to anything that is going to define for Joe and Jane Public whether this is a good year or a bad year. And we used to vote in America would be, well, do I have more money in my wallet in the last 4 years or not? Because if not, I'm voting for the other guy. And people would jump parties routinely on that basis. Now, everybody just lies through their teeth as much and as hard as possible. And we're just getting an onslaught of propaganda on all these issues. And nobody can give you a straight assessment of what the real, it's out there, but it's never going to make it into the consensus. So that straight, honest assessment is not going to become the consensus in the current political system and environment. It's just one propaganda paradigm battling against the other. And so the truth doesn't even come into it. Nothing from the Democrats. This is open goal in soccer terms. Like they can't score on this. Trump has just left the goal open on everything. The economy, foreign policy. It's just pathetic.
How could they?
I don't know.
Their foreign policy is trash, and it's not that different than Donald Trump's. They may say different things, but it's the same. Economically, what can you say?
If they had a Ron Paul or a Dennis Kucinich or somebody with a brain, or maybe an upgraded Rand Paul with a little more, I don't know, if more finely tuned a little bit, but they could just clean up. They could take all of this fence sitters, all of the disaffected MAGA, all the disaffected Dems, the Bernies, and basically clean up and register them as Dems, or it could do it within the Republican Party as well, or a third party. I'm not sure if that's ever going to work in the U.S., but so we don't have this old saying, Jamal, that American eagle needs two wings to fly, and if there's only one wing, it's going to be in a tailspin. That's where we're at right now. Is the uniparty is a single wing. The other wing, which should be the common sense constitutional representative wing, and sometimes that's a Republican wing, sometimes that's a Democrat wing. It's not there. It's just hanging. It's in paralysis. And the United States, the American eagle, is in a tailspin right now because of that. There's no viable opposition to the uniparty. Nothing. And Trump was not it. Trump was not it.
You're 1,000% correct. You are 1,000% correct. Patrick Henningsen. Patrick Henningsen is a geopolitical analyst, journalist, host of the Sunday Wire, creator of 21st Century Wire, and critic of mainstream media propaganda. Patrick, man, always appreciate you, man. I really do. And the audience had even asked about you. They're like, "Where's Patrick? Where's Patrick?" So thank you.
I just launched a Substack. I just want to mention, I just launched a Substack page. It's patrickhenningsen.substack.com. I don't know if you dropped that link in your show description, but I just launched it recently, and I'm starting to, publish some more personal writings, and it's a different type of content than we have at 21stcenturywire.com.
Badass, man. I'll put it in the bottom of the video so people can see at the end of this, and I'll put it when I cut this and upload it. I'll put it into that one also.
Thank you.
Be safe, man. Have a good day. Okay. Thank you for this.
You too. All the best.
Bye-bye. All right. Patrick is